Imagine, for a moment, that you have walked the long road south from Baragast, that the wind off the Sea of Swords has been at your shoulder for the better part of a day, that the gorse and the salt grass have given way to bare volcanic stone, and that you are now standing at the foot of a crag thrust out from the sword coast like the prow of a ship. Above you rise walls of gray stone 50 feet high, crowned with towers of every size and style, candles burning in their windows so that at night the silhouette resembles a cake set with too many candles. You have come a long way to stand here. You are carrying a book. The book is the price of admission. You are about to discover whether the price will be accepted, and the people who will accept it or refuse it are watching you from the gatehouse, dressed in purple vestments, sworn to the scribe god Denir. And they have done this for so many centuries that they barely notice the wind anymore. The fortress has a name. The name is older than most of the kingdoms whose travelers come here. The name is Candlekeep. I want to begin with the gate because the gate is the moment most outsiders never get past, and I want to honor that fact by sitting in it for a while. You approach. 5 purple vestmented monks tend the gate at any given time. One steps forward to greet you, discusses your purposes, and asks to see what you have brought. You produce the book. The Avowed take it, turn its pages, examine its title and provenance. As they examine, a second monk among the gatekeepers casts a quiet spell, the cantrip called Message, sending a thread of speech back into the keep to an Avowed in a chamber not far inside, where that Avowed sits with an enormous tome that catalogs, by means the order does not fully explain, every work the library possesses. The tomekeeper checks. The tomekeeper responds. The message returns to the gate. If the answer is that the work is already in the collection, the gift may be refused. If the answer is that the work is new to the keep, or that it is a copy of sufficient quality or annotation to merit acceptance even of a known text, the gift may be accepted. The whole procedure can take minutes or hours, sometimes longer if the tomekeeper has to consult further, or if a difficult question arises that requires a senior sage. Throughout, the other monks at the gate watch closely for any trouble, and additional monks observe from the high towers that flank the gates, ready to summon help or to lend magical support in case of attack. The gatekeepers are looking for something quite specific. They are looking for a work the library does not already possess. A chest of gold will not open the doors. A lavishly bound copy of a text already on the shelves will be politely returned. What the gatekeepers want is a manuscript no one has seen, or a journal that records experiences the order cannot otherwise reach, or a treatise whose margins have been annotated by a hand the order considers worth keeping, or even a familiar work that has been carried through events of historical interest and bears the marks of where it has been. The standard is flexible in its surface and unforgiving at its core. The work has to add. If the work adds, the gate opens. If it does not, the gate stays closed, and you may not appeal, and you may not try again within the same generation with the same book, and the road home is long. Should the gate open, you become a seeker in the formal sense, addressed by the monks as good seer or good lady if they do not know your name, given lodging in the house of rest, fed at the common table in the great hall called the Hearth, where small shrines stand to Denir and Gond and Millil, and granted 10 days, one 10-day, in which to read what you have come to read. You will not enter the great library. The books come to you, carried by an Avowed who has retrieved the volume from its proper place and who will return it when you have finished. You will read in one of the necessariums, the cluster of reading towers that ring the inner ward, 12 of them at the last reckoning, each fitted with chambers where a seeker may sit alone or in pairs and study by the light from the narrow windows. You will not copy, you will not remove. The exchange is simple. You bring a book, you read books, and the books stay. Should your gift have been extraordinary, your 10-day may be extended. For most seekers, 10 days is what most seekers get, and 10 days is what most seekers leave with. A word about the gate I should add before I continue. The visible gate is not the only way into Candlekeep. There exist, by the testimony of the surviving lore, what the Order calls the Old Gates, ancient hidden entrances whose locations are unknown even to the most senior of the present Avowed. The Old Gates were built into the original fabric of the fortress for purposes the Order can only guess at, and access through them requires three things: precise knowledge of the location, the correct postures to be held while approaching, and the right intonations spoken at the right moments. Without all three, the gate does not open, and the wards of the keep treat the would-be entrant as the wards treat any intruder. Some of the old gates have been forgotten entirely, lost to the centuries. Others persist as rumor. A very small number are known to the keepers and used for purposes the keepers do not discuss. The existence of the old gates is one of the features of the place I find most quietly haunting, because they tell you that the keep contains within itself routes of access that the keep itself has forgotten, and that a person who knew the right secrets, lost since the founding, could in principle enter without the gate ever knowing it had been bypassed. I do not know if such a person has ever existed. The Avowed will not say, but the existence of the old gates is on the record, and the record is worth taking seriously. The Order itself numbers, by the most recent count I have, around 300 Avowed in residence at any given time, with that number drifting up or down by a few dozen as initiates arrive and elders die. The majority of the 300 are low-ranking monks, scribes and copyists, and binders and assistants, the broad working body of the Order who perform the daily labor. A smaller number, perhaps 50 or so, are the senior Avowed who carry the deeper responsibilities. And above them sit the readers, of whom there are very few in absolute numbers, perhaps a dozen at the top of the chain. I will come back to the readers in detail later. For now, hold in mind that the institution is not large. 300 is the population of a small village. The keep is, in this sense, an intentional community as much as it is a library, and the smallness is part of what allows it to maintain its institutional memory across centuries. Everyone knows everyone. The conversations that need to happen can happen at a single common table in the hearth. The keep is small enough to be coherent. The composition of the Order, by the testimony of those who have studied it, is more varied than the standard picture suggests. Humans predominate, but they have never been the only people in residence. The keep has, across its long history, accepted initiates from any of the speaking peoples of the realms who could meet the standard of the gate and the standard of the novitiate. There have been Elven Avowed, Dwarven Avowed, Halfling Avowed, Gnomish Avowed. There have been monks of half-Elven and half-Orcish descent. In the present generation, as I have mentioned, the first reader Bookworm is a dragonborn of green dragon ancestry, and one of the great readers, Alchrist, is a dragonborn of bronze dragon ancestry. And the presence of dragonborn in two of the keep's most senior positions tells you something about how the Order has opened its leadership to peoples who would have found such positions difficult to attain in many other institutions of the realms. The Order's meritocratic principle is real. The Avowed who rises to a senior position rises because of demonstrated competence, not because of birth or kindred, and the rises have included monks whose origins would have been considered exotic by the more conservative institutions of the Sword Coast. Women are well represented within the Order, including at its senior levels. The current keeper of the tomes, Janussi, is herself a woman, and the records show several other women have held the keepership across the centuries, including some of the most consequential figures in the Order's history. The Avowed do not assign roles by gender. The novitiate accepts whoever can meet the standard. The labor of the keep, whether copying or binding or guarding or interpreting, is open to whoever can perform it. This egalitarianism is not unusual in itself among the institutions of the realms, but the keep has practiced it for longer than most and with greater consistency, and the consistency has shaped the Order's internal culture in ways the Order does not foreground, but that anyone who spends time at the keep eventually notices. Why do people join? The question is, I think, the deepest one I can ask about the Order, and I do not have a complete answer. Some join because they have a scholarly vocation, and the keep is the most prestigious place in the realms to pursue scholarship. Some join because they have a religious vocation, and the gods of knowledge call them. Some join because they are running from something in the outside world, and the keep is a refuge that asks no questions about what its initiates are leaving behind. Some join because they came as seekers, fell in love with the rhythm of the place during their 10-day, and discovered that the life outside the walls had lost its appeal. Some join because they are by nature solitary, and the keep offers solitude with company, the company of others who have also chosen solitude. The reasons are many, and the keep accepts initiates regardless of which reason brought them, provided they can pass the testing of the novitiate. What the order requires is not a particular reason for joining. The order requires that the initiate be able to bear the work, and the bearing is what the novitiate tests for, and those who can bear it stay, and those who cannot leave with no shame attached to their leaving, and the order continues. I find it striking when I think about this that the keep has succeeded in being a place where so many different kinds of people can find a use for themselves. A scholar can be a scholar at the keep. A mystic can be a mystic. A craftsman can be a binder. A soldier can be one of the armed monks who serve the gate warden. A natural diplomat can serve at the gate examining gifts. A natural recluse can spend their life in the copying rooms. The keep has roles for almost any temperament that can accept the underlying discipline of the order, and the roles are arranged so that each role serves the larger work, and the larger work absorbs the differences in temperament into a single labor that depends on all of them. This is, I think, one of the secret strengths of the institution. The keep does not require its members to be the same kind of person. It requires them to be members of an institution that contains many kinds of person, and the containment is what makes the institution work. Let me linger on what those 10 days actually feel like, because the experience is unlike any other reading experience the realms offers. You rise early. You eat at the long tables of the hearth, in silence or in low conversation with the seekers seated near you, served by monks whose names you do not learn and whose faces will not change in your memory, because the faces are trained to a kind of professional blankness. After the meal, you go to your assigned necessarium, climbing the spiral stair to the reading chamber you have been given for the duration. The chamber is small and clean. There is a desk with a reading slope. There is a chair. There is a narrow window facing the sea, through which the morning light comes in at the proper angle for reading. You sit down. An Avowed appears, almost silently, carrying the first book you have requested. They lay the book on the slope. They tell you the rules briefly, in case you have forgotten. Do not remove. Do not eat in the chamber. Ring the bell beside the desk if you need another volume. Return the volume to the slope when you are finished, and the Avowed will collect it. They leave. You read. The reading itself is a peculiar experience, because the chamber is so quiet, and the light is so good, and the book is so much older than you are, that the act of reading takes on a weight it does not have elsewhere. You become aware that the book has been read by others. You become aware that the marks on the page were made by hands long dead. You become aware that the chamber you are sitting in has been occupied by other seekers in other centuries. Men and women who came up the same road you came up, who brought books to the gate as you brought yours, who sat in this same chair at this same desk and read for 10 days and went home. You are part of a long line of readers, the chamber is telling you, and your 10 days are a small piece of a continuity that began before you and will go on after you, and the awareness is humbling and oddly comforting at the same time. The Avowed return when you ring the bell. You request the next volume. The Avowed leaves and returns, often within minutes, sometimes within longer, if what you have asked for requires a deeper retrieval. The exchange happens without small talk. The Avowed are pleasant when they speak, but they do not encourage conversation, and you learn within the first day to confine your communication with them to the requests themselves. You eat the noon meal in the hearth. You return to the chamber. You read until the afternoon light fades. You eat the evening meal. You walk the cloister around the court of air as the endless chant goes by, the chanter and the voices in their procession, the formula falling at the end of each line. And you have heard the formula so many times by now that you begin to anticipate it. And the anticipation is part of how the keep gets inside you. You sleep in the house of rest in a bunk among other seekers, and you rise the next morning, and you do it again. By the third or fourth day of a 10-day at Candlekeep, most seekers report that something in them has shifted. The rhythm of the keep has gotten into them. The slowness has stopped feeling like obstruction and started feeling like depth. The procession of the endless chant has stopped being a curiosity and started being a heartbeat. You read more carefully than you read at home. You think more carefully. You stop trying to extract from each book the one piece of information that brought you to it, and you start reading the whole of the book, because the whole of the book is what is in front of you, and the whole of the book is more than you came for. By the end of the 10-day, when the Avowed informs you that your time is up and that you must depart, most seekers leave with the work they came for done, and also with something else. Something they did not know they were going to find, something the keep gave them in exchange for the gift they gave at the gate. The exchange is uneven. The keep gives more than it asked for, every time, and that is part of why seekers come back. I should say plainly, before I go further, that everything I have just described is the visible part of Candlekeep, and the visible part is a small fraction of the whole. The deeper architecture of the order is rarely written down, and what is written is rarely shared with those who have not taken the oaths. I have been working from chronicles, from the secondary accounts left by travelers who passed through during their 10 days, from the tax rolls of the kingdoms that have tried at one time or another to assert authority over the Sword Coast and have failed, and from the scraps the Avowed themselves have permitted to enter circulation in the form of the small compilation books they release once a year for sale in Baldur's Gate and Waterdeep. Where my sources are firm, I will speak with confidence. Where they are not, I will say so. There are stretches of this script where I might be mistaken due to a lack of information, and where the Avowed themselves would correct me if they bothered to comment on a thing like a recorded script made far from their walls. They will not bother. So I have to do the correcting in advance by flagging the limits of what I can know. The history of the Order across the long centuries between Alaundo's death and the present is one of those stretches. The internal workings of the novitiate are another. The contents of the locked library are a third. Treat my account of those things as my best reading, no more. Now, the Order. The monks of Candlekeep call themselves the Avowed, which is a name that tells you something about the institution by the simple fact of being a participle. They are not a noun, they are a verb. They have sworn. The swearing is the point, and the oaths they take are old enough and binding enough that an Avowed who has taken them is, by the Order's own reckoning, a different sort of person from an Avowed who has not. The content of the oaths is partly known and partly secret. The known parts include silence on the affairs of the Order, fidelity to the work of preservation, refusal of personal profit from the texts the Order holds in trust, and acceptance of the discipline of the Keeper of the Tomes, who stands at the head of the institution. The secret parts are secret. I will say a little about what I suspect they include, but I am only guessing, and I want to be clear about that. At the top of the Order's hierarchy sits the Keeper of the Tomes, whose authority on matters of the collection is final, whose word can declare a prophecy fulfilled, and whose tenure runs until death, or until they decide they can no longer continue. Beneath the Keeper is the First Reader, the principal assistant, a role that combines the functions of Chief of Staff and Senior Teacher, and that also carries the specific duty of expanding the Order's literary resources, which means the First Reader is the one most often responsible for evaluating extraordinary gifts at the gate, for sending out the discreet purchasing expeditions the Order undertakes when it learns of an important manuscript in private hands, and for pursuing the long-lost tomes that occasionally surface from dungeons or estates or shipwrecks. Beneath the first readers sit the Great Readers, who number 8, each acknowledged as the Order's foremost expert on a particular area of study. The Great Readers form a council that oversees the day-to-day operations of the keep, and that breaks any vote that needs to be broken, with the first reader holding the tie-breaking vote when the council itself is evenly split. And beneath the Great Readers is the broad body of the Avowed, who do the daily work of copying and binding and cataloging and tending. The succession in this hierarchy is, as I understand it, partly chosen and partly elected. A keeper of the tomes, while alive, chooses their own successor from among the Great Readers, and the choice is made formally and recorded so that the transition can happen without dispute when the keeper dies. If a keeper dies or departs without making a choice, the Great Readers vote among themselves, and the first reader breaks any tie. The system is meritocratic in the sense that the keepers and readers all rise from the broad body of the Avowed by demonstrated competence, rather than by birth or political connection. But the system also concentrates considerable discretion in the hands of whoever currently holds the keepership, because the keeper's word is law within the walls, and the keeper's edicts are recorded for the edification of future keepers, building over the centuries into a body of internal precedent that shapes how the next keeper inherits the office. The Great Readers, as the Council of 8, deserve a word of their own. Each is the keep's foremost expert on a defined area of study, and the areas are assigned by the keeper according to the Order's current sense of what needs covering. The areas shift across the centuries as the world changes and as the prophecies thrust new subjects into the Order's working concerns. In one century, the council might include a Great Reader specializing in the politics of the Sword Coast, another in the magic of the elven traditions, a third in the cosmologies of the plains, a fourth in the lesser gods, a fifth in the chronicles of vanished kingdoms, a sixth in the bestiaries and natural philosophies of the surface world, a seventh in the Underdark and its peoples, an eighth in the prophetic tradition itself. In another century, the council might have a different composition entirely, reflecting different priorities, different gaps in the keep's understanding, different external pressures. The continuity of the office matters more than the continuity of the specialism. There are always 8 Great Readers. What the 8 study together is what the keep currently most needs to know. Alongside this chain of scholars, there is a parallel structure for the defense of the keep. The officers who command the armed monks who patrol the walls and the gates. The gate warden oversees the defense of Candlekeep and commands the armed monks who serve at the outer perimeter. The watchers serve under the gate warden, 4 of them, each responsible for a portion of the wall. And the keeper of the Emerald Door, who was once called the keeper of the portal, holds the inner gate that separates the great library from the spaces in which seekers are permitted to move, serving as both sentry and concierge. Each of these officers commands a dozen well-armed monks, and the monks are themselves no ordinary swordsmen. By the testimony of those who have studied the order, nearly all of the officers and many of the soldier monks are powerful spellcasters, archmages, or close to it, their weapons supplemented by a wide collection of magical implements the order has assembled across the centuries for purposes of defense. The keep does not advertise this. The seeker who arrives at the gate sees what looks like a few quiet monks asking polite questions. What stands behind those monks in reserve, in the towers and in the inner ward, is something else entirely. And the something else is part of why direct attacks on Candlekeep have so rarely succeeded across the long centuries of its history. The magical defenses themselves deserve a paragraph. Candlekeep is wrapped in layers of wards, woven into the very stone of its buildings, accumulated across generations of avowed mages who each added what they could to what they had inherited. The protections, by the testimony of those who have written about the keep, restrict entry by means of teleportation. They prevent scrying. They preserve the writing in the collection from mold and insect damage, slowing the natural decay of the parchment in ways the binders alone could not manage. They inhibit any flame larger than a candle, which is one of the reasons the keep can keep so much fuel for light without becoming a perpetual fire hazard, and which is also one of the reasons the candles in the high windows can burn without the towers themselves catching alight even during the worst storms off the Sea of Swords. The protections are layered, the layers reinforce one another, and the whole arrangement is anchored to an elven mythal that protects the central keep, a piece of high elven magic that the Avowed are said to have inherited from sources the records do not explain. The mythal can, in times of great need, be activated by the Keeper of the Tomes, drawing on the accumulated power of the wards for purposes the routine functioning of the keep does not require. Stories also speak of a great shield, a more dramatic enchantment that repels or incinerates those who would bring harm to the library, and that requires a complex ritual to invoke. Whether the Great Shield is a separate working from the broader wards, or simply a name for the most aggressive layer of them, my sources disagree. The Avowed do not clarify. What can be said is that the keep is, at the level of arcane defense, considerably more formidable than its quiet outward appearance suggests. There is also a tradition of guardianship that I want to mention, because it predates the present structure and tells you something about the Order's relationship to its own defense. The tradition begins with a prophecy Alaundo gave during his lifetime, a prophecy that described the offering of a young man to the library, the first of many, who would give himself to the place and become a part of it forever, forming a guardian entity that would protect Candlekeep from darkness and harm. The first of these, by the surviving lore, was a probationer named Bairn, who came to Alaundo with a vision of his own that matched the seer's. Having seen in his vision a divine messenger telling him such a guardian would have to be drawn from one who truly believed in what Candlekeep stood for. Bairn had doubted his own worthiness and kept the vision to himself until Alaundo's prophecy made the matter unavoidable. The two of them spoke for hours. Then Alaundo left Bairn alone in his private chambers. When Alaundo returned and resumed his audiences, Bairn was no longer there. Alaundo only smiled and declined to answer what had become of him. The chronicles do not tell us more. They imply much. They confirm nothing. What the Order accepts is that something happened in that chamber, and that Bairn was the first of what would become a long line of similar dedications, and that the line continued across the centuries as further probationers stepped forward to take up the same labor. These guardians are not the only protections the keep possesses. The wards I mentioned earlier, the magical layers woven into the buildings, are the more visible apparatus. The guardians sit behind them, deeper, and they are perhaps why the wards have held as long as they have. I do not pretend to understand the theology of the guardian offering, or whether it would meet a modern reader's standards of consent and dignity, or what the experience would be from the inside for the probationer who said yes. The records are not in circulation. The Order does not discuss the tradition with outsiders. I include it here because the tradition is on the record and because it tells you that the keep has, at its center, a deeper layer of protection than the visible one, and that the deeper layer was paid for by the surrender of selves on the part of those who agreed to the offering. The keep is, in this sense, defended not only by walls and wards and armed monks, but by something stranger and older. And the something stranger is one of the reasons the keep is what it is. To which I should add that the gods of knowledge stand close behind the Order without exactly being the Order. The Avowed honor Ogma above all, the binder of what is known, whose temple sits within the inner ward in the building called the House of the Binder. They also honored Denir, the scribe god, whose priests serve at the front gates, Gond, the maker, whose craft is the craft of the binders, and Millil, whose song the chanter and the voices weave through the air of the court of air with the endless chant. Mistra, the goddess of magic, is also honored at the keep, since so much of the Order's work touches on the weave and on the texts the weave makes possible, and her shrine sits among the others in the hearth where the Avowed take their meals. The order is not, strictly speaking, a priesthood of any one of these gods. Its devotions are spread. By the descriptions that have leaked into the wider record, the Avowed are sometimes called non-denominational, rather than properly religious, scholars first and worshippers second, though many of them are also clerics of one or another of the knowledge gods, and a handful are wizards whose practice depends on the goddess of magic. Most pantheons are respected within the walls, and there are smaller shrines for the less prominent deities scattered throughout the inner ward for those who wish to honor them. The keep is a temple to a constellation of related powers rather than to a single one, and the constellation matters because no single one of those gods could supply on their own the shape of the work the order does. The work the order does is held together by a labor I have not yet described in any detail, and I want to spend some time on it now, because everything else at Candlekeep arranges itself around it. The labor is the endless chant. The chant is the recitation of the prophecies of Alaundo, performed in procession through the court of air, led by a senior monk who holds the title of the chanter, accompanied by 3 other monks who hold the titles Voice of the North, Voice of the East, and Voice of the South, with a Voice of the West joining on certain occasions whose precise rules I have not been able to determine. The procession walks, the voices recite. Each line of the chant ends with the formula that the Avowed regard as the proper seal upon a prophecy. The formula, so saith the wise Alaundo. The chant has been performed for centuries without interruption, day and night, in shifts, through wars and storms and the deaths of gods. Now here's the strangest feature of the chant, and the one I find most worth dwelling on. The chant grows shorter. When the Keeper of the Tomes determines that a particular prophecy has been fulfilled by an event in the world, that prophecy is removed from the chant. The procession ceases to recite it. The line is set down, archived among the records of fulfillment, and the procession continues with what remains. Across the centuries, the chant has been pruned in this way many times. The Avowed do not lament the pruning. They record it and they move on, and the chant is a little shorter than it was the day before. Most religious recitations grow with time. Theirs does the opposite. The tradition is, in its peculiar way, watching for its own completion, although the completion is so far off that no living Avowed expects to see it. Alongside the spoken chant, there are the echoes of Alaundo, which I should mention because they are one of the few features of the institution that involves magic openly. The echoes are prismatic gemstones in which the prophecies have been preserved in the seer's own voice by an invention attributed to one of the original novitiates who studied under Alaundo and found a way to record him as he spoke. They are kept within the inner fortress, and the secret of how to play them, of how to draw the voice back out of the gemstone, is held only by the keepers of the tomes and the first readers, passed from one office holder to the next as part of the inheritance of the role. The echoes are spoken in Old Common, the language of the era in which Alaundo lived, and to a present-day listener, they require magical assistance to comprehend, because the language has drifted across the centuries to a point where the unaided ear cannot follow. The Avowed, by my information, rarely bother to consult the echoes, because the prophecies are difficult to interpret in any form, and the echoes do not make them easier. The voice is real, the wording is original, and yet the meaning is no clearer when heard from Alaundo's own mouth than when read from a copy by a copyist 1,000 years later. The echoes are old. They are older than any living Avowed, and they are, in some sense, the closest thing the realm still possesses to the actual voice of Alaundo speaking, even if the realms cannot, except through the few who hold the secret, hear what the voice is saying. If you sit in the court of air at the right hour and listen, you can hear the chant moving past you, the procession circling the central buildings, the formula repeating at the end of each line, so saith the wise Alaundo, so saith the wise Alaundo. The sound is faint at distance and clear up close. Once you have learned to listen for it, you find that you keep listening, and the listening teaches you something about the place that no description can convey. The work has been going on longer than you have been alive. It was going on before your grandparents were alive. It will be going on when your grandchildren are old. You are sitting in a room of the world that does not run at the speed the rest of the world runs at. And the room has been doing this for so long that you suspect it could keep doing it forever, even if everyone outside the walls forgot what it was for. Let me now do something the popular story of Candlekeep usually skips, and tell you that Alaundo did not found this place. The popular story has it that Alaundo gathered followers around him on a windswept cliff, that they built walls to protect the recording of his prophecies, and that the Order of the Avowed grew up from that seed. The popular story is wrong. Candlekeep is older than Alaundo by perhaps a century. The fortress stood on its crag by the testimony of the surviving chronicles from the year of stone arising in the old Dale's reckoning, which would place its founding around 200 years before the calendar's 0 point. Alaundo did not arrive at the keep until the year of clinging death, well into the 1st century of the modern reckoning, and what brought him there was the library that was already in place. He came to read, he stayed because the place suited him, and he spoke his prophecies within walls that had been built for other purposes by hands no one alive can name. That changes the picture somewhat. The Order's institutional self-understanding builds outward from Alaundo's death, when the keeping of his prophecies became the labor around which everything else was reorganized. But the keep itself is older, and the earlier purpose of the place is one of the great, quiet mysteries the Avowed do not enlarge upon. Who built the original walls? The chronicles do not say. Theories circulate. The theories generally involve elves of the Old North, or a vanished order of human ascetics, or a hermit who attracted disciples, or some combination of all three. And the Avowed listen to such theories with polite attention and decline to confirm any of them. They will tell you what they can prove. They will not invent what they cannot. On the question of who first set stone upon stone on the crag at the edge of the Sea of Swords, they have nothing to tell. Alaundo himself is, on the whole, more documented than the popular accounts of his prophecies often suggest, but less documented than a figure of his importance might warrant. The chronicles give us a birth year, somewhere in the years just before the Dale's calendar's 0 point, and a death year in the year of Windsong, 76 by the Dale's reckoning. We know he arrived at Candlekeep in 75 DR, the year of clinging death, to study the writings already kept there. We know he was a seer of remarkable accuracy. We know he prophesied the date of his own death and was still writing prophecies 3 days before the end. We know he honored Denir, Ogma, and Savras, the 3 gods most closely connected to writing, knowledge, and divination. We know his prophecies were recorded by the monks who came to study under him. Beyond these scattered facts, the details thin out quickly. Where Alaundo was born, what tradition he came from before he reached the keep, who taught him to read the visions that came to him, what his face looked like, what voice he spoke in. None of this survives in any form I have been able to verify. We have his words. We do not have him. There is one strange exception to this, which I will mention because the lore is in circulation and the rumor is too odd not to include. Alaundo's skull, after his death, became a relic venerated by the faithful of Denir, Ogma, and Savras, and by the Avowed of Candlekeep, on the belief that the bearer of the skull could speak directly with Alaundo by means of a speak with dead spell, no matter how many centuries had passed. The skull was, by some accounts, the resting place of Alaundo's continuing existence as something like a weave ghost, his prophetic ability lost, but his speech still possible. The skull was stolen from the keep shortly after his death and has been lost to the Order ever since, surfacing periodically in rumor, sought by the Illithids of Orendal and by other parties whose interests in the seer's continuing voice are easier to imagine than to verify. I cannot tell you whether any of this is literally true. The records say what they say. What I can tell you is that the seer's life is more recoverable than I would have you believe if I stopped at the prophecies themselves, and that the obscurity I have been describing is partial rather than total, and that the man behind the words is at least sketched in the lore, even if he is not fully drawn. I find this obscurity striking because it suggests that the Order has not been interested in making Alaundo into a person you can identify with. The Avowed honor the prophecies. They do not appear to have honored the prophet by building a cult of personality around him, by preserving his biography, by elevating his life into hagiography. He is the channel through which the words came. The words are what matter. The channel is allowed to fade. And the fading is itself a piece of the Order's theology, if you read it carefully, because it tells you that the work is the work, and the person who began the work is no more important than the persons who continue it. The institution has, in this respect, eaten its founder, and the eating is intentional, and the founder would probably have approved. I find this particular gap in the record more interesting than I think the Avowed do, because the gap suggests something about the Order's character. They have inherited a fortress whose origins they cannot trace, and they have taken up the inheritance without anxiety, and they have built within it a labor of their own choosing, and they have made peace with the fact that they will never know what came before them. The book is older than the reader. The Avowed say in their internal proverbs. So is the building, it turns out. So is the institution. And the proper response to inherited mystery is to keep the inheritance well, rather than to demand explanations from a past that has gone silent. The prophecies of Alaundo, which are the spine of the Order's work, deserve a section of their own, and I want to give them one before I move on. There are many of them in the records the Avowed have compiled and are still compiling. They vary in length from a single line to passages of several pages. They vary in subject from the rise and fall of particular kingdoms to events of cosmic scope to predictions whose meaning has never been decoded, and which the Avowed leave open in the expectation that future events will clarify them. Some have been fulfilled. The fall of the kingdom of Netheril is among the fulfilled, as are the various reincarnations of the goddess of magic, and the upheavals of the time of troubles when the gods walked the earth, and the appearance of the god-children of Baal that followed. When such a fulfillment is confirmed, the line is removed from the chant and entered into the records of fulfillment, and the chant continues, a little shorter with what is left. Other prophecies have not been fulfilled. Some describe events that may yet come. There is a prophecy, much discussed among the Avowed and almost never spoken outside the walls, that describes the breaking of the wall between the planes. There is a prophecy that describes the return of a dead god through a door of silver. There is a prophecy of a season of false suns. There is a prophecy of a city that has yet to be built. And there is a prophecy, which I am told by sources I cannot fully verify, of a reader who will arrive at Candlekeep bearing a book that contains the names of every Avowed who has ever lived. The Avowed are split by the same uncertain sources on whether that last one is meant to be read literally or as a metaphor, and on whether such a book could be assembled even in principle. I would not press the point. The Avowed themselves do not press it. They keep the line in the chant and they wait, and the waiting is part of the work. I find the unfulfilled prophecies more interesting than the fulfilled ones, because the fulfilled ones are settled and the unfulfilled ones are still alive. To read a list of the open prophecies of Alaundo is to read a list of futures the realms may yet have to live through, and the experience is a peculiar one, somewhere between reading a horoscope and reading a will. The prophecy of the breaking of the planar wall is the one I find hardest to dismiss, because every century or so, the wall between the planes is reported to thin in one place or another, and each thinning is examined by the great readers for resemblance to the prophecy's wording, and each examination has so far concluded that the resemblance is not close enough to call a fulfillment. The wall is still there, the prophecy is still waiting, and the next thinning, when it comes, will be examined like all the others, and either the prophecy will be declared fulfilled or it will be kept in the chant for the next generation. The prophecy of the dead god returning through a door of silver is perhaps the most actively monitored of the open lines. Several gods have died across the long history of the realms, and several of those deaths have been temporary, and the question of whether one of the temporary deaths matches the prophecy's wording is one the Avowed argue about quietly across the centuries. Baal's death is sometimes cited. Mistra's various deaths and reincarnations are sometimes cited. Helm's loss and recovery has been cited, and yet none of these has matched the prophecy precisely enough for the keepers to call it fulfilled. Because the door of silver in the wording is unaccounted for in any of the divine returns so far recorded, and the Avowed will not declare a fulfillment on partial resemblance. The line remains, the door of silver is still ahead. The prophecy of the city that has yet to be built is, of all the open lines, the one I find most poetic. The wording, as it has been described to me, suggests a great metropolis that will rise in a place that is currently empty, that will become the center of the realms for a time, that will fall in its turn, and whose fall will mark a transition in the political order of the world. The Avowed do not know where this city will be. They do not know when it will rise. They have, on more than one occasion across the centuries, examined the founding of a new settlement and asked whether this might be the one. The answer has so far always been no, but each new founding is examined. Each new founding could be the one, and the endless chant carries the line forward into another generation, waiting. The contents of the collection beyond the prophecies are, I should say, vast and miscellaneous, and the miscellany is a feature rather than a flaw. The order has refused, by long policy, to limit itself to works of historical or theological importance. The Great Library holds, alongside its chronicles and treatises, thousands of recipes, hundreds of songbooks, the diaries of farmers and weavers and small-town merchants who recorded the affairs of their villages for no audience but themselves, journals of voyages on ships whose captains have long since drowned, working notebooks of magelings who never became full wizards, account books of inns that have long since burned down, and the kind of accumulated minor writing that most institutions would discard as not worth the shelf space. The Avowed keep it all. They made it. They keep it because they cannot know which of the minor writings will turn out in some future century to have preserved a piece of information no one else thought to preserve. The diary of a farmer who recorded 80 years of weather observations in a particular valley becomes priceless to the historian of climate who wants to know what that valley was doing in that period. The account book of the inn that burned down becomes priceless to the genealogist trying to trace a particular family's movements through that part of the coast. The working notebook of the mageling who never made wizard becomes priceless to the scholar trying to understand the magical practices of that century at the level of the ordinary practitioner rather than the celebrated master. The keep does not know in advance which of its minor holdings will turn out to matter, so the keep keeps them all, and the keeping is part of the labor, and the labor pays forward into futures the Avowed cannot foresee. Let me name a few of the famous works the collection is known to hold, because the named works give you a sense of what kind of texts the Order considers worth special mention. The Lore of Leroux, which I described earlier as Ulraunt's entrance gift, sits among the keep's treasured volumes and is consulted by scholars of the unicorn goddess Leroux and of the early High Magery of Silvery Moon. The annotated Prophecies of Alaundo, the working copy with Taltro's commentary that I described in connection with the first reader of the 8th century, is held within the inner library and is one of the most often consulted texts in the entire keep. There are said to be original or near original copies of works by Mistra's chosen archmages, including treatises on the weave that no one outside the order has been permitted to read in their full form. There are said to be chronicles of vanished kingdoms, including detailed records of Netherylville before its fall, of the elven kingdoms of the deep past, of the dwarven holds whose names survive only in legend. There are said to be bestiaries compiled from observations across centuries, recording creatures that no longer exist, as well as creatures that have appeared only in the past few generations. There are said to be cosmological treatises on the Great Wheel and its alternatives, on the planes and their relations, on the gods and their portfolios across the various reorganizations the Divine Order has undergone in the long history of the realms. The list goes on. The collection is, by all accounts, the largest of its kind in Faerun, and possibly the largest on the whole of Toril. What I find moving about the collection, considered as a whole, is how much of it is not famous. The named works I have just mentioned are a tiny fraction of what the Great Library holds. The rest is the patient accumulation of 1,500 years of preservation, the minor histories, the obscure treatises, the personal journals, the recipe collections, the songbooks, the genealogies. This is what the keep mostly is. To picture Candlekeep as a treasure house of celebrated texts is to misunderstand it. The keep is something else, something more like an enormous patient archive of writing of every kind, most of which would have been lost without it. And the existence of the archive means that the realms has a memory of itself that no other institution provides. A scholar in the present moment can walk to the gate of Candlekeep with a sufficient gift, and within a 10-day, they can read a recipe book compiled by a cook in Mulhorand 400 years before they were born, or a sailor's journal from a voyage that ended in the wreck of its ship somewhere off the coast of Mastika, or the account book of a village inn in the foothills of the Cloud Peaks during a famine. No chronicle outside the keep recorded. They can hold in their hands the working notebook of a Halruan mage from the year of the Crimson Tower, with its diagrams sketched in the mage's own ink, and its later corrections in a different hand from a successor who inherited the notebook and added their commentary to its margins. They can read a play that has not been performed in 3 centuries, the last copy in existence having reached Candlekeep when its previous owner died, and his executor brought it as an entrance gift. They can read love letters from a noblewoman in Tether whose family preserved her correspondence and donated it to the keep when the family line ended. They can read a treatise on the philosophy of language written in a dialect of Common that no one now speaks, with the original alongside a careful translation that an Avowed of the 8th century undertook because the work was important enough to be preserved in both forms. The Realms has a memory because Candlekeep has the books. The books are at Candlekeep because the Avowed have been keeping them generation after generation for 1,500 years in the patient confidence that someone someday would want what they had kept. What does the world look like to a person who has organized their life around the waiting? I have tried to imagine it. The Avowed live in a peculiar double time. They live in the present moment as any of us do, eating their meals at the hearth, walking the cloister, attending to the books in their care. But the present moment for them is always being measured against the prophetic text. Every piece of news that reaches Candlekeep from the outside world is examined for resemblance to one of the open prophecies. Most of the news fails the test. Some of it triggers a sustained conversation, a question that the great readers will sit with for weeks, a meeting between the chanter and the keeper of the tomes that the rest of the order will respect by maintaining silence in the corridor outside the chamber. Most of those conversations end with the conclusion that the resemblance was coincidence. A few end otherwise, and a line is taken out of the chant, and the chant continues with one fewer prophecy than it had before. To live this way is to live differently from how the rest of the realms lives. The Avowed do not live in the present as you and I do. They live in the present as a piece of evidence about whether the past was right. Let me now walk you through the keep itself, the physical fabric of the place, because the layout maps the institution's priorities, and I want you to be able to picture the spaces I have been naming. You have already met the outer gate, with its double doors 3 times a man's height, forged from a dark metal that is said to be proof against lightning and against magical divination. Inside the outer wall lies the Court of Air, the great open space where the endless chant performs its circuit. Around the court of air stand the buildings of the inner ward, the hearth, the eating hall with its shrines to the gods of knowledge, the house of rest, the bunk room where seekers sleep, the house of the binder, the temple of Ogma, the necessariums, the 12 reading towers where the actual reading happens, the kitchens and warehouses and granaries and stables and infirmary that no monastery anywhere can do without. And rising from the center of the inner ward, the great library itself, the central keep proper, the building that contains the bulk of the collection and that none but the avowed enter. The great library is a structure of many floors, accreted across the centuries as the collection grew. The most commonly consulted works sit on the lower floors. The rarer and more fragile works sit higher up, where the air is drier and the foot traffic is less, where the binders can monitor the parchment for signs of deterioration without having to fight off the bustle of daily consultation. The rarest works of all are kept in chambers whose locations the avowed do not disclose, and to which access is restricted to the keepers and to those avowed who have been trusted with the specific work the keepers have assigned them. Somewhere within those upper chambers, by long rumor, is the place some have called the locked library, where works that the order has judged too dangerous for general circulation are kept under stronger seal. The avowed will not confirm that the locked library exists. They will not deny it either. They simply decline to discuss it, and the declining is itself a form of confirmation, although the order would never put it that way. I have spent some time thinking about what might be in the locked library, and I want to share the thinking while being clear that it is speculative. The avowed are not reliable witnesses on the subject because they have committed themselves to not being witnesses on the subject. So everything in the next paragraph is rumor, filtered through other rumors, and you should take it with the appropriate skepticism. The rumors, taken together, suggest several categories. Prophecies Alaundo gave to a few trusted listeners and forbade them to record, which were recorded anyway after his death by those who had heard them and who could not bear the thought of losing the words. Theological treatises that the temples of the realms have at various points asked the order to destroy, and which the avowed have refused to destroy while agreeing to seal them away. Magical texts that the schools of magic regard as too dangerous to teach, the kind the Harpers and other Watchers of the Realms have been working to suppress for centuries, and which have ended up at Candlekeep because Candlekeep is the only institution in the realms with the weight to refuse to either teach them or destroy them. And then, perhaps, works whose subjects the order itself has not catalogued, books that were placed in the upper chambers by earlier avowed for reasons those avowed did not record, and which sit there still in a state of suspended judgment. This last category I find most haunting. The thought of books in Candlekeep that no living member of the order has read, that have been in the keep's care for centuries and have not yet been judged, that wait in the dark for someone to decide what they are. I cannot prove that any such book exists. The institution is the kind of institution in which such a book might exist. The rest is rumor. Beneath everything I have described lie the catacombs. They are carved into the dark volcanic rock of the crag, extending down through the stone in a series of chambers and connecting passages whose full extent the avowed themselves do not know. They serve two functions. They are the burial ground of the order, where many of those who have died at Candlekeep have been interred, and they are a storage facility for works that the order has decided cannot be kept in the upper library and must be kept somewhere. The first function is well documented. The second is not, and falls into the same category of rumor as the locked library above. The catacombs are also guarded in a manner most catacombs are not. By the testimony of those who have written about Candlekeep, the lower chambers are watched over by the ghost of a great dragon called Mirim, bound long ago to the defense of the keep, and the avowed by a sorcerer named Torth, whose memory survives within the order alone. Mirim does not show themselves to visitors who have no business below. Mirim shows themselves to those whose business is the wrong sort of business, and most who encounter the presence turn back without needing further encouragement. I cannot tell you what a ghost dragon looks like, because I have not seen one, and the few accounts that exist are inconsistent. But the general impression I gather is of a vast translucent shape that is felt before it is seen, and that carries with it a sense of weight far in excess of its visible mass. The Avowed treat Mirim as a member of the order in their own way. The ghost has duties, the ghost performs them, the arrangement has held for centuries, and there is no reason to suppose it will not continue to hold. The burial chambers themselves are arranged by century, and they have a feature I want to mention because I find it strangely moving. The names of the dead are carved into the walls in the order of their dying, and each name is followed by the dates of initiation and death, and by a single line that summarizes the work the deceased dedicated their life to. The work descriptions are short. The Avowed do not eulogize. A description might read, "Kept the Chronicle of Cormyr," or "Served as Voice of the North," or "Labored at the rebinding of the Leston folios." That is all. The lives of the dead are summarized in a single function, the function that justified the life. There is no hierarchy in the burial chambers. The keeper of the tomes lies in the same wall as the lowest Avowed of their generation. The labor was the labor, and the labor was equal in its dignity, and the names of those who did it lie in the same stone. I want now to bring all of this down to a particular moment in the keep's recent history, because the moment illuminates the institutional character of the place better than abstract description can. The moment is the Baalspawn crisis of the late 1360s, the unfolding of a prophecy the endless chant had been carrying for over 1,000 years before its fulfillment began. A word of background. During the time of troubles in the year of shadows, 1358 by the Dale's reckoning, the gods of the realms were cast down by Ao into mortal flesh, and many of them did not survive the cataclysmic upheaval that followed. Among those who fell was Baal, the god whose portfolio was violent death, undone by Cyric. Baal had foreseen his own end and had prepared for it by leaving behind a great many mortal children scattered across the realms, knowing that their existence would in time become the matter of his return. Alaundo had prophesied these god-children in a passage the endless chant had been reciting since before the kingdom of Cormyr was founded, and the prophecy hung over the order through generation after generation of Avowed, waiting to see whether it meant what it seemed to mean, or whether it meant something else, or whether it would ever come true at all. It came true on Ulrant's watch. Ulrant was the keeper of the tomes in the years around 1368 DR, served by his first reader, Tethteril, and his name appears in the chronicles because of what happened on his watch, rather than because of anything Ulrant himself did. Before I get to the events, though, let me tell you about Ulrant himself and about Tethteril, because the character of the two men shaped how the keep responded to the crisis when it came. The keepers of the tomes across the centuries have been a varied lot. Some have been scholars of great personal achievement, the kind whose individual treatises have entered the curriculum of the wider realms. Some have been administrators, the kind whose talent was for the management of the order's affairs, and whose names are not associated with any particular text. Some have been mystics, the kind whose authority derived from a perceived closeness to Alaundo's tradition, and some have been figures whose tenures are remembered less for what they did than for the era they presided over, the way a king is remembered for the wars of his reign, even when the wars were not of his making. One name from the earlier centuries deserves mention here, although the record on him is thin. The first reader Taltro served in the 700s by the Dale's reckoning, and he undertook a labor the order had not undertaken in quite the same way before. Taltro went through the surviving copy of the prophecies of Alaundo and annotated it, line by line, with what he had been able to gather about the fulfillment of each prophecy across the centuries since Alaundo had spoken. He was attempting to compile a working commentary, a guide to which prophecies had come true and how, which were still open, and what the most plausible interpretations of the still open ones might be. The work took him much of his lifetime. The annotated copy survives, by all accounts, in the inner library, and it is consulted to this day when the order needs to think about a particular prophecy in its historical context. The annotations are, by long tradition, taken seriously. Elminster of Shadowdale, in one of his many recorded asides on the subject of Candlekeep, dismissed much of Taltro's commentary as errant nonsense. But Elminster has his own opinions about almost everything, and the order has not removed Taltro's annotations from the working copy. They sit alongside the original prophecies as a layer of interpretation that any reader of the text must reckon with, whether by accepting Taltro's readings or by arguing with them. I find Taltro's project quietly moving because it represents the order's long struggle with a basic problem. How do you know from inside the tradition which prophecies have actually been fulfilled? The world is large. Events resemble other events. A prophecy of a king who falls under a black moon could, depending on how you read the figurative language, describe any number of historical falls. Taltro was trying to assemble the corpus of best readings, to fix the consensus where consensus was possible, to flag the ambiguities where they could not be resolved. His project is, in a sense, what the Order has been doing collectively across its whole history, but Taltro was the first reader who tried to write it all down in one place. Whether he got it right, Elminster's complaints notwithstanding, is not the point. The point is that he tried, and the trying is what the Order does. Ulraunt's path into the keep is itself a piece of realms lore worth telling. As a young traveling monk, well before he was anyone of consequence, Ulraunt came into possession of a supremely rare book, The Lore of Larue, a treatise penned by Akamain Truesilver, the first High Mage of Silvery Moon. How exactly Ulraunt acquired the book, the records do not say. What can be said is that he brought it to the gates of Candlekeep, presented it as his entrance gift, and was admitted, and over the subsequent decades of patient service, he rose through the ranks of the Avowed until eventually he was chosen as keeper of the tomes. That trajectory, from young monk with a single rare book to keeper of the most important library in Faerun, is the kind of trajectory the Order is designed to permit. The gate does not care about your station. The gate cares about what you have brought. Ulraunt had brought a remarkable book. The book was enough. Ulraunt was, by reputation, a figure of considerable dignity and considerable difficulty in roughly equal measure. He kept the Order's traditions strictly. He held himself at a certain remove from visitors. Petitioners who sought access to the library were required by Ulraunt's standing order to share at least one evening meal in his presence, seated to his left, and to entertain him with answers to whatever questions he chose to pose about their purposes, their backgrounds, and what they hoped to find among the endless bookshelves of Candlekeep. The interrogations had an edge to them, deliberately. They were designed to test the petitioner, to expose pretension, to weed out those who had come for the wrong reasons. Most petitioners who underwent the meal with Ulraunt emerged with their access confirmed, but their dignity rumpled, and the rumpling was the point. He was respected within the walls and not always loved. He treated the keep as the keep, an institution older than him to which he was responsible, and he carried that responsibility with a gravity that those who needed something from him sometimes found difficult. His spellcraft was reportedly considerable. By the rumors that circulated within the keep and occasionally outside it, Ulraunt's personal collection of spells eclipsed that of most spellcasters in Faerun, and he practiced his magic in his private chambers and in the deeper catacombs and caverns beneath the keep, where the wards permitted what the wards permitted nowhere else. His ultimate goals were not widely known. The visible ambition was simply that Candlekeep should remain what Candlekeep had always been, say, the center of scholarly studies on the Sword Coast, and perhaps grow into something more, a political power as well as a scholarly one. Whether that ambition was pursued in any active way during his keepership, or whether it remained a private hope, I cannot tell. After the time of troubles in 1358, Ulrant was, by the surviving accounts, tempted briefly by Cyric, the new god of strife, who had emerged from the upheaval with hungers his old portfolio had not previously contained. Cyric reached out to the haughty wizards of Candlekeep, and Ulrant among them, sensing in their pride a possible foothold for his own influence on the Sword Coast. The temptation was real. The keep would have been a substantial prize for Cyric. Tethtoril, by the accounts, was the figure who held the line. The first reader, gentler than his keeper, but politically wiser, kept Ulrant and the wizards of Candlekeep from following Cyric or any of the other dark powers who attempted similar approaches in the chaotic years that followed the time of troubles. That Tethtoril managed this without open rupture, without forcing Ulrant to either accept the temptation or admit publicly that he had been tempted, is a quiet testament to the first reader's skill. The keep survived the period of temptation with its leadership intact, its allegiances unchanged, and its standing in the wider realms preserved. Tethtoril held the door, exactly as a first reader is supposed to. The pairing of these two men was, in the way of such pairings in long institutions, complementary rather than competitive. The keep needed both men. The keeper held the line. The first reader held the door. One of Baal's children had been raised within the walls of Candlekeep, taken in as an infant by the sage Gorion, an old friend of Elminster and a longtime resident of the keep, and brought up among the books with no knowledge of what he was. The detail that the child grew up at Candlekeep matters because it tells you something about how the order had positioned itself in the broader realms by the late 14th century. The keep was not, in this period, sealed off from the world. The Avowed accepted occasional charges. The keep raised children when there was reason to. Gorion was a wizard and an old hand at adventures, a harper of standing, and the order trusted him to bring an unusual ward into the walls without explaining the full background. Whether the order knew the child was a Baal spawn is a question the records do not settle. My guess is that Gorion and perhaps Ulrant and Tethtoril knew, and that the rest of the order did not, and that the knowledge sat in the senior leadership as a piece of trust the wider community was not asked to share. But this is speculation. I might be wrong about who knew and when. The records on this point are silent or contradictory, and I have done what I can with what I have. In the year of the banner, 1368, Elminster sent a letter warning Gorion that another of the Baal spawn, a man named Saravok Onchev of the Iron Throne, had begun moving against his siblings. Gorion fled the keep with his ward, intending to bring him to safety. They were intercepted on the road. Gorion died defending the ward. The ward escaped. His name in the surviving novelizations of these events was Abdel Adrian, although the records of the period are inconsistent on the point, and I will not press it. What followed was the great crisis of the era. Saravok pursued his sibling across the Sword Coast and back to Candlekeep itself, infiltrating the catacombs with doppelgangers who masqueraded as residents of the fortress, and by some accounts, took on the likeness of Gorion himself. The Avowed found themselves caught in the middle of someone else's prophecy. They did what the Avowed do. They defended what could be defended. They preserved what could be preserved. They let the crisis move through them rather than letting it consume them. When it had passed, they returned to their work, and they did not boast about what they had done. The role Candlekeep played in the Baal spawn crisis appears in the Order's own chronicles in language that is noticeably reluctant. The Avowed declined to think of themselves as heroes. They thought of themselves as having endured and as having continued, and the continuation was what the institution measured itself by. I dwell on this episode because I think it tells you what the Order is more clearly than any abstract description could. The Avowed had spent over 1,000 years preserving a prophecy that turned out to be about a baby raised within their own walls. They had no idea, when they took the child in, that the child was the prophecy fulfilling itself. They could not have known. The prophecy had been waiting too long for anyone to imagine it might land in their own century. And when the crisis arrived, they did what their institution does, which is endure, defend, continue, and resume. The keep had held a piece of its own future in its arms for years without recognizing it, and the holding had been ordinary, and the holding had been enough. There is a coda to the story that I want to mention because it brings the episode back to Candlekeep in a way I find quietly fitting. The Baal spawn raised at the keep, by the canonical accounts that survive of the events that followed, did not in the end ascend to godhood despite the opportunity being offered. They refused the divinity. They turned away from the throne their father had hoped they would claim. And the chronicles say they returned to Candlekeep to live out a quiet life among the books that had raised them. Whether this canonical ending describes the full truth of what happened, or whether it is one of several possible endings the record permits, I cannot say with certainty. The novels say one thing. The games that depict the events say several things. The Order's own records on this question are not in circulation. What I can say is that the version in which the Baal spawn comes home to the keep refuses the godhood and ends his days as a quiet seeker among the necessariums, reading and walking the cloister and growing old in the place that raised him, is the version I find emotionally true to the keep's character. The Order had raised the child without knowing what the child was, and the child had grown into a power that could have reshaped the realms in ways that would not have ended well, and the child had chosen to come back to the place where the books were. The keep absorbs its returnees the way it absorbs everything. Quietly, without comment, with a chair at the common table in the hearth and a cell in the house of rest, and a 10-day that extends, as some 10 days do, into a year, and the year into another, and the years into a life. The figures of Ulraunt and Tethteril fade from the records after the crisis was resolved. They continued their service. They presumably died at their posts at some point in the decades that followed and were interred in the catacombs with the rest of the Order, and the brief lines summarizing their lives now sit on the walls of the chamber of the 14th and 15th centuries, kept the chronicles through the Iron Crisis, served as first reader. The summaries are short. The Avowed do not eulogize, but the lines are there, and the lives are kept in the stone, and the Order goes on, and the next keeper of the tomes presides over the next century of the work, and the endless chant has lost the prophecy of the godchildren and is one line shorter than it was before. I want now to take you forward through the century and a quarter that followed the Baalspawn crisis, because the keep did not stop existing after the events of 1368, and the period that followed contained some of the most dramatic episodes in the keep's entire history. The Order does not advertise this period the way it does not advertise anything, but the records have leaked, the chronicles preserve enough, and a reasonably patient reader can piece together a sketch of what Candlekeep endured between the Baalspawn era and what amounts to the present day. The first episode worth telling involves Ulraunt directly and is dated to 1375 by the Dale's reckoning, 7 years after the Baalspawn crisis. By this point, Ulraunt was still keeper, Tethtoril still first reader, and the keep was returning to its usual rhythms after the disruption of the previous decade. In that year, a group of adventurers came to Candlekeep on a quest connected to the returned out of the reclave of Thultanthar, the floating city of shadows that had reappeared in the skies of Faerun after centuries of absence. The Netherese were a growing threat, and the adventurers needed information the keep possessed. Ulraunt received them. He invited them to dine with him, as his standing order required of all petitioners. The meal he served by the surviving account was thin soup, stale bread, boiled vegetables of indifferent quality, and watered wine. It was not a meal designed to flatter the guests. It was designed to communicate that the keeper of Candlekeep was not impressed by their station, that the keep's resources were not at the disposal of every passing band of heroes, and that the petitioners would have to earn their access by the quality of their answers rather than the quality of their reputation. Throughout the meal, Ulraunt pelted the adventurers with questions. what they were seeking, what they had done to deserve the search, what they thought they would do with the information if they found it, what their goals were beyond the immediate quest, what they hoped to accomplish in the larger configuration of the realms. The adventurers, by the account that survives, found the meal an ordeal. The meal was meant to be an ordeal. And at the end of it, the access was granted, and they got what they had come for, and they left, and Ulront presumably returned to whatever he had been doing before the interruption, and the keep absorbed the encounter into its long pattern of welcoming and screening petitioners and went on. I find the thin soup dinner emblematic of Ulront in a way that the broader chronicles do not capture. He was a man who took the keep seriously enough to be rude to its visitors when rudeness served the keep's interests, and who took the keep seriously enough to spend his evening cross-examining adventurers about their quests when his evening could have been spent more pleasantly elsewhere. He was, in his peculiar way, a perfect keeper of the tomes. The institution he served required his particular combination of dignity, suspicion, and willingness to be unpleasant. He had what the institution needed. The institution had him. And the meals continued, and the petitioners came, and the questions were asked, and the keep went on being what the keep was. The deeper crisis of the next century, though, was not something Ulront would live to see. In 1385, by the Dale's reckoning, the year of blue fire, the goddess of magic was struck down by Cyric and Shar in a conspiracy whose details remain disputed, and the weave, the universal structure of arcane forces, convulsed and collapsed. The disaster that followed is called the Spell Plague, and it ravaged the realms for a decade. Magic spells faltered or failed. Wizards found that the spells they had relied on for their entire lives turned against them in unpredictable ways. Whole regions of the world were transformed, parts of Toril melding with the sister world of Abair, geography rewriting itself in fits of raw magical reaction. The keep, sitting on its crag at the edge of the Sea of Swords, did not escape. How exactly the spell plague hit Candlekeep the records do not fully document, and I might be wrong about some of the specifics here, but the broad pattern is recoverable. The keep was defended, as I have said, by layers of magical wards woven into its buildings by the magic of generations of avowed mages. When the weave collapsed, those wards collapsed with it. The keep was, for a period whose length I cannot determine, exposed in a way it had not been exposed since perhaps its founding. The wards came back in some form when Mystra eventually returned to her godhood and the weave was restored, but the form they came back in was different from the form they had had before, and the Avowed of the period spent considerable effort reweaving what could be rewoven and replacing what could not. The collection survived. The walls survived. The endless chant continued through the disaster, although there are accounts that during the worst of the wailing years, the chanter and the voices walked their procession with no certainty that their voices would carry past the next moment, because the air itself seemed unsure of what air was. The keep endured as it always endures. And when the worst had passed, the labor resumed, and the records of the period were duly compiled and added to the chronicles, and the lines summarizing the lives of the Avowed who died during the spell plague were carved into the walls of the catacombs along with all the rest. The next great crisis, the one I want to describe in some detail because it is one of the most extraordinary events in the keep's history, came at the end of the Wailing Years and into the closing years of the Second Sundering. It is called the Battle for Candlekeep, and it is the most dramatic single episode I know of in the entire long story of the place. By the surviving accounts, which are themselves contested and which I am presenting here with appropriate caution, the events ran roughly as follows. The returned Netherese enclave of Thultanthar, the same floating city that had been a concern at the time of Ulront's thin soup dinner generations earlier, had by this point grown into one of the major dark powers of the realms. The Shadovar, the people of Thultanthar, were led by the Most High Telemont Tanthul, and their ambitions in the wake of the spell plague had grown to include the seizure of the weave itself for their goddess Shar. They wanted what was in Candlekeep. They wanted the wards of the keep, specifically, which had absorbed centuries of magical energy and which represented a substantial reservoir of arcane power that could, in the right ritual, be turned to other purposes. And they had spent decades, perhaps as long as 20 years leading up to the year of the crisis, infiltrating the order with sleeper agents, monks who had passed the gate's tests and taken the oaths and lived among the true Avowed in the patient hope that their moment would come. The moment came in the year 1487 by the Dale's reckoning on the 9th of Marpenoth, when the keep was still recovering from the spell plague, and its wards were not at their old strength. The Netherese sleepers activated. They attacked their fellow monks. They moved to seize the wards and the library. What the Netherese had not anticipated was that they were not the only faction that had infiltrated the order. The Moonstars, the secretive network of magical agents serving under Laeral Silverhand, had also planted their people among the Avowed, and the most senior of those planted agents were Laeral and Alustriel of the Seven Sisters themselves, living quietly within the keep under the cover of monastic identities. Their purpose was a strange and tragic one. As chosen of Mystra, their power was a piece of the goddess made flesh, and in the chaos of the Sundering, they feared that their power could be used against the new weave by anyone who managed to seize them. Their plan was to prepare their own destruction, to ensure that no faction could use the Silver Hands to gain control over the weave. The Red Wizards of Thay had planted their agents too. The Harpers had planted theirs. By the surviving accounts that I have consulted, even the Seven Sisters more broadly were represented within the keep's ranks. The battle that erupted when the Netherese sleepers activated was therefore not the one anyone had planned. It was a multi-sided melee of factions that had each thought their infiltration was secret, suddenly discovering that the other factions had been infiltrating too, and that the Avowed who had been sitting next to them at the common table for years had not been who they appeared to be. Into this melee came Elminster of Shadowdale, the old archmage whose connections to the keep ran back decades. Elminster had come to Candlekeep on his own quest, looking for the writings of Kelban Aronson on the nature of the weave, hoping that Kelban's notes might help him understand how to strengthen the new weaved in. Mystra had begun to weave in the wake of her return. He arrived in the middle of the battle. His role in the events that followed is the strangest part of the story. By the accounts, Elminster managed to deceive the Shadowvar attackers by masquerading as their own Most High, Telemont Tanthul, throwing their command structure into confusion. The deception worked. The Shadowvar lost momentum, and the great readers of the Avowed met the attack with a great spell battle and rebuffed it. Then a fifth player revealed himself. Larlock, the ancient lich called the Shadow King, who had been watching the affair from his own concealment, stepped into the open and presented Elminster with a proposition. The wards of Candlekeep, Larlock suggested, were damaged and could be repaired and strengthened if Elminster would help channel their accumulated energies through a particular ritual. Larlock's stated reasoning was that strengthening the wards would help strengthen the broader weave, and that the weave urgently needed strengthening. Elminster, by the surviving accounts, agreed. The deception was Larlock's, and it was successful. The ritual went forward. The wards of Candlekeep, which had stood on the crag for over 15 centuries, were drained of their accumulated energies, and the energies were absorbed by Larlock rather than redirected to the weave. The wards were destroyed in the process. The keep was suddenly stripped of the magical protections that had defended it for most of its existence. The cost to the order itself was severe. Many Avowed were killed during the battle and the destruction of the wards, including the Keeper of the Tomes who held the office at the time. The keep's leadership had to be reconstituted from the survivors in the immediate aftermath. Larlock left for Myth-Dranor with the absorbed energies of Candlekeep's wards. Elminster, Laeral, and Alustriel pursued him. The Battle of Myth-Dranor that followed is its own story, ending with the sacrifice of the Srinshi, the ancient elf queen of the city, who wrested the magical energies back from both Larlock and Telemont Tanthal, and used the combined power of Candlekeep's wards and Mythdranor's Mythal to strengthen the weave at the cost of her own existence. The Shade Enclave of Thultanthar itself crashed onto Mythdraenor in the climax of the battle. The Netherese threat was ended, the Shadowvar were broken, the keep meanwhile had been gutted, its wards were gone, the keeper was dead, many of its defenders were dead. The infiltration had revealed that the Order's screening processes had failed across decades in ways that were quietly horrifying to the Avowed who survived to consider the implications. The reweaving and rebuilding that followed took years. By the time it was done, the keep was something different from what it had been, with wards reconstructed from new principles, with screening procedures revised to catch what the old procedures had missed, with the institutional memory of having been infiltrated now permanently lodged in the Order's self-understanding. The keep that emerged from the battle for Candlekeep was wiser and more wary than the keep that had entered it. The Avowed do not boast about having survived the episode. They simply note that they did, and that they learned what they needed to learn, and that the work resumed. I should be honest before I move on that there are aspects of this account I might be wrong about. The events of the battle for Candlekeep are told in chronicles that differ on details. Some sources attribute the central deception to a different lich than Larlock. Some sources give the year as slightly different. Some accounts emphasize the Shadowvar more, others the Moonstars, others the Lich. What I have presented is the version I find most consistent across the sources I've been able to consult, but I want to flag that I am working from secondary accounts at this distance, and that the Order's own version, if I had access to it, might differ in particulars. The broad shape, though, is solid. The infiltration happened, the battle happened, the wards were destroyed, the keeper died, the Srinshi saved the weave at Mythdraenor, the keep emerged from the crisis altered and survived. That brings us to the present, more or less, the present being the 1490s by the Dale's reckoning, the years in which I'm recording this script. The keep is led now by figures different from the Olraunt and Tethtoril of the Babalspawn era. The keeper of the tomes is a human archmage called Janusi, a devoted follower of Denair the scribe god, and her position at the top of the Order is recent enough that the institution is still adjusting to her style of leadership. The first reader is a figure who goes by the name Bookworm, a dragonborn master sage whose dragon ancestry is of the green variety. Bookworm's birth name, by the records, is Skoda Valanaster, but everyone within the keep and most of the wider realms know the first reader by their adopted title. The great readers in the present generation include Alay Ivanmore, a human master sage and worshipper of Ogma, whose expertise is divinity and the nature of the divine. Alchrist, a dragonborn master sage of bronze dragon ancestry whose expertise is politics, military strategy, and the significant battles of Toril. Daral Yashenti, a human master sage and poet whose expertise covers literature, song, and the records of the bards, and others whose names I have not been able to confirm in the time I have had to research. The keep in the present moment is, by the accounts I have received, recovering still from the long cumulative damage of the previous century. The wards have been rebuilt, the screening has been tightened, the infiltrations of the battle for Candlekeep are now generations in the past, but the Order remembers them, and the remembering shapes how new initiates are vetted, how senior posts are filled, how trust is extended to anyone who has not been an Avowed for the full span of their visible life. Janusi, by reputation, is a careful keeper, less imposing than Olraunt but more politically attentive, working to position the keep for the next century rather than merely to maintain it through this one. Bookworm, by reputation, is an aggressive first reader, more inclined than some of their predecessors to send out expeditions for lost manuscripts, to negotiate for unusual collections, to grow the library actively rather than to wait passively for gifts at the gate. The two of them, together, represent a slightly different temper than the keep has had at various points in its past. The institution adapts, the work continues. There's something else I want to say about the order before I move toward the close. The work the Avowed do is a work that produces a peculiar kind of person, and I want to describe that person, because if you walk among them, you will recognize what I mean. An Avowed who has been at Candlekeep for 40 years has stepped out of the rhythm the rest of the realms keeps. They speak more slowly. They listen more patiently. They are willing to sit with a problem for a year without showing visible progress on it, because they know the problem is older than they are and will outlast them, and there is no shame in failing to solve it. They have given up the satisfactions of completion. They have replaced those satisfactions with the satisfactions of continuation, which is a different thing and which most of us do not understand until we are very old, if we understand it at all. They are calmer than other people. They are more patient than other people. They are also, I think, lonelier than other people in a way they do not name, but that you can feel if you spend time with them. Because the price of stepping out of the rhythm is being out of step with everyone who is still in it. The shape of an Avowed's day is one of the things the Order discusses least and that I would most like to know more about. From the few descriptions that have leaked into the wider record, I can piece together a partial picture, but I want to flag again that my picture is incomplete and may be wrong in details. Most Avowed seem to rise before dawn, attend a brief observance at the Temple of Ogma in the House of the Binder, take a meal in the hearth, and then disperse to the labor to which they have been assigned. Some go to the copying rooms, where the slow, patient work of duplicating fragile manuscripts continues at the pace it has continued for centuries. Some go to the binding workshops, where the physical bodies of the books are restitched and rebound, and have their covers replaced when the old covers have worn through. Some go to the necessariums to wait on seekers, retrieving the requested volumes from the great library and returning them when the seekers have finished. Some join the procession of the endless chant, taking their assigned turn in the rotation, walking the court of air with the chanter and the voices, reciting the prophecies in the order the records prescribe. And some, the most senior of the order, spend their hours among the records themselves, comparing news from the outside world against the open prophecies, looking for the resemblances that might prompt a keeper to declare a fulfillment and remove a line from the chant. The labor of copying deserves a longer description because it is, in many ways, the most characteristic of the labors the order performs. A monk assigned to the copying rooms sits at a desk by the morning light with a fragile original in front of them and a fresh sheet of parchment to one side, and they reproduce the original with absolute fidelity. They copy not only the text, but the layout, the marginalia, the corrections of earlier hands, the marks of damage and wear. The standard the order imposes upon itself is that a copy made at Candlekeep should be indistinguishable from the original in every respect except its age. This standard is not always achieved. The Avowed are human, mistakes are made, but the standard is fidelity, and the standard is enforced by the copying masters who review each completed page before it is bound into the new volume. A page that fails the review is destroyed. A page that passes it is added to the work. A volume that fails review in aggregate is unbound and its failed pages destroyed and the work begun again. The waste is considerable. The Avowed do not regard the waste as waste because what is being protected is the chain of transmission, and a chain with a weak link is no chain at all. Why such fidelity? Why preserve the marginal scribbles of long-dead readers, the corrections of editors whose names have been forgotten, the smudges where a candle dripped wax onto the page? Because the order does not know what will turn out to matter. They do not know which marginal note in which obscure work will one day, in a century or in 5 centuries, become the crucial clue that unlocks a problem the present cannot even pose. So they preserve everything. To preserve only what seems important in the moment is to assume a knowledge of the future the order does not possess, and the Avowed have made a discipline of refusing to assume knowledge they do not have. This is, I think, the most Ogman doctrine I can identify in the place. Ogma is the god of knowledge, the binder of what is known, the one whose holy work is the preservation of truth in all its forms, and the doctrine that you preserve everything because you cannot predict the relevance of anything runs to the core of his faith. The Avowed will not say so in those terms. Their language is humbler, but the practice gives the theology away. The binding work is in some ways more humble and in some ways more dramatic. A book is a physical object made of parchment or paper, ink, glue, thread, leather, and wood. And each of those materials ages, and the binders are the Avowed who tend the aging. They restitch broken spines, they replace worn covers, they lift fading ink from parchment grown brittle and transfer the text to fresh sheets that will last another century. The work is unromantic and meticulous. The binders are, by tradition, among the most cheerful of the Avowed, perhaps because their work is so plainly useful and so plainly endless that they have made peace with both facts and stopped troubling themselves with either. A book that comes into the binder's hands leaves them ready to last another 500 years, and the binders know this, and the knowledge is its own quiet satisfaction. The work of the necessariums is different again. A monk who serves the seekers learns to navigate the great library by memory. They learn which shelf holds which kind of work. They learn the order in which the centuries of the collection are arranged. They learn, by long practice, to anticipate what a seeker is likely to want next, when the seeker has finished with what they came for, and to bring it before the seeker has thought to ask. They learn to read the seeker as well as the request, and to judge when a seeker has come for the right reasons, and when a seeker has come for the wrong reasons, and to flag the wrong reasons cases to the keeper of the Emerald Door, so that the keeper can take whatever action the keeper considers appropriate. The serving of seekers is, in this respect, a quiet form of intelligence work, and the monks who do it are sharper than they appear, because their faces have been trained to show nothing, and the training holds. The loneliness is part of the cost of Candlekeep. The order pays it. The novitiate exists in part as a long testing of whether a candidate can bear the loneliness, and many candidates discover during the years of the novitiate that they cannot, and they leave, and the order does not regard them with shame. The order would rather lose a novice than lose an avowed after the oaths have been spoken. The oaths are taken only by those who have looked at the loneliness and accepted it, and the order is composed of those people, and that is part of why the institution functions the way it does. The avowed have agreed to be alone with the work. The work binds them to each other. I want to mention the cats before I close, because no honest account of Candlekeep can leave them out. They are everywhere within the inner ward, dozens of them, tabby and gray and tortoiseshell and black, moving with the slow propriety of creatures who know they are at home. The Avowed do not name the cats. The cats have no formal place in the order. The cats are tolerated, fed, and quietly relied upon because cats kill mice and mice eat parchment, and a fortress full of parchment cannot afford to have mice. The keepers of the tomes, who are otherwise the most rigorous of the Avowed, prove the most indulgent toward the cats. You will see a keeper walking the cloister and pausing to scratch the head of a cat that has stopped in their path, and the cat will accept the attention as something owed, and the keeper will move on. The cats sit on the reading slopes of the necessariums when the slopes are not in use. They sleep in the windows of the copying rooms where the morning light comes in. They cross the court of air in slow diagonals as the procession of the chant passes them, and the procession does not chase them, and the cats do not hurry. I mention them because they are part of what the place is. The cats prove in their own small way that the order makes room within its walls for warmth, for affection that does not name itself, for the kind of company that does not require oaths. There are also the diviners who visit, drawn by the resonance of Alaundo's tradition, drawn by the chance to consult the open prophecies and compare them with whatever it is they themselves are seeing. The Avowed receive these visitors with care. A diviner who brings a sufficient gift is admitted like any other seeker. A diviner who claims to have seen something the Avowed should know is heard politely, and the claim is recorded, and the order makes its own quiet judgment about whether to act on it. The diviners who come to Candlekeep are often eccentric. The Avowed are accustomed to eccentricity. They make space for it within the work, and the work absorbs it, and the diviner moves on, and the records remain. There is one further category of inhabitant I should mention before I close, and that is the small population of outsiders who have been granted unusually long residence at the keep. These are scholars whose gifts at the gate were extraordinary enough, and whose work has continued to interest the order enough that the Avowed have extended their 10-day into years. They live without taking the oaths, occupying cells in one of the guest buildings for as long as their work continues to produce results the order finds valuable. They eat at the common tables, they walk the cloister, they use the necessariums. They remain guests throughout, however long their stay runs, and the Avowed treat them with a courteous distance that the guests eventually come to understand. The work produced by these long resident scholars has, across the centuries, contributed treatises and chronicles of considerable importance to the realms, treatises that could not have been written anywhere else, because nowhere else has the source material the keep has. The Avowed take no credit for these treatises. The treatises belong to their authors. The conditions under which the treatises were written belong to the keep, and the Avowed are quietly aware of the contribution, although they would never put it that way. Occasionally, there are other arrangements as well, the kind that do not fit neatly into any category. Apprentices brought in by senior Avowed for specific instruction. Visitors from temples of Ogma and Denir who come for retreat. Envoys from one or another monarch who arrive with formal business and are housed in particular cells reserved for that purpose. The keep has, across its long history, accumulated a complicated set of social categories for the various people who pass through it, each category with its own protocols and its own expectations. And the order maintains the categories with the quiet professionalism of an institution that has seen everything before and will see it all again. The seeker at the gate may not realize it, but they are entering a place that has procedures for every conceivable kind of visitor. And the procedures have been refined across many centuries, and there is very little a new arrival can do that will surprise the Avowed. I want to come back for the closing of this script to the question I posed near the beginning. What kind of institution is Candlekeep when you strip away the obvious and look at it as a piece of theology and masonry? My reading, after spending a long time with the sources I have, is that Candlekeep is the realm's answer to the question of what to do with knowledge across spans of time that exceed the human lifespan. The answer the keep gives runs against what we modern readers tend to think the answer should be. We tend to think the answer is to spread knowledge as widely as possible, to remove every barrier between reader and text, to make access easy. Candlekeep gives a different answer. The keep believes that the durability of knowledge depends on the difficulty of reaching it, and that the difficulty is a feature of the preservation, and that an institution that lets anyone walk in at any time and take what they want will lose its collection within a generation. Friction is protection. The walls are 50 feet high for a reason. The price of admission is a book for a reason. The procession of the endless chant continues for a reason. Each of those features is a refusal to make the keep convenient, and the refusal is what allows the keep to outlast convenience. Before I finish, I want to say something about the Order's relationship to the wider realms, because the relationship is one of the most carefully managed in the world, and tells you a great deal about how the Avowed think. The Order has, by long tradition, no political position. The Order takes no allegiance to any kingdom, claims no preference for any monarch, declares no enmity with any faction. Gifts at the gate are accepted from any source provided they meet the standard. Seekers are admitted from any nation, provided they meet the standard. Across the centuries, this policy of perfect neutrality has made Candlekeep the one place in the realms where any two enemies can sit at adjacent reading desks without expectation of conflict, because the keep will permit no quarrel within its walls, and the prohibition is enforced by the simple fact that anyone who broke it would lose access to Candlekeep forever. And the loss of access is one few are willing to risk. A monarch who would not hesitate to send agents against a rival in the streets of Suzail will sit in a chair in a necessarium 2 yards from that same rival and read a treatise on cosmography, and the two will leave at the end of their 10-day without having spoken, and the keep will have been protected by the threat of its own withdrawal of welcome. The neutrality has been tested many times. Monarchs have offered enormous gifts, hoping to buy preferential access. They have not received it. Temples have proposed theological agreements that would have placed Candlekeep under the supervision of one or another priesthood. The order has politely declined. Factions in the long wars of the Sword Coast have demanded that the Avowed take sides. The Avowed have refused, and the demand has eventually faded, and the keep has remained what the keep is. My reading of this pattern is that the neutrality serves a practical purpose rather than a moral one. The Avowed do not consider themselves morally superior to the factions of the realms. They consider themselves occupiers of a particular position that the work requires. And they maintain the position because the work depends on it. If the work demanded that the order take a side, the order would take a side. The work does not demand it, and so the order does not, and the position holds for another year, and another, and another. There is one further feature of the keep's external life I want to mention, and that is the small publishing program the order maintains for the wider world. Once a year, by long custom, the Avowed compile and release a short volume on a single subject, a brief work that gathers the best of what the order possesses on that topic and offers it for sale in Baldur's Gate, Waterdeep, and the other major cities of the coast. The compilations are stamped with the sigil of the keep, attributed only to the order itself rather than to any individual hand, and sold for whatever price the market will bear. The compilations cover whatever subject the order has decided is timely. A bestiary of northwestern Faerun 1 year, a codex of the coast roads another, a treatise on the lesser gods of the Dales a third. The compilations are valuable for what they contain, and even more valuable in the secondary market because they are produced in small editions and bear the keep's stamp, and a collector who possesses a complete run of them is rare enough to be remarked upon. The compilations are also, I think, the keep's way of feeding back into the broader knowledge ecology of the realms without compromising the protections of the inner library. The Avowed give a little, they release a little, they permit a little of what they hold to enter circulation, and the circulation reminds the realms that the keep exists and that the keep has more, and the remembrance keeps the keep relevant in centuries when no monarch has felt the need to consult it. The initial sale prices of the compilations are usually in the range of 50 to 100 gold pieces, depending on the length and the binding, and the order makes only a modest profit on them, because the costs of paper and ink and labor at the keep are higher than the costs at the commercial printing houses of Waterdeep. The real value of the compilations is the secondary market, where copies appreciate steadily and where complete runs are passed down through wealthy families as a quiet form of cultural capital. The order does not participate in the secondary market. The Avowed sell what they produce at the price they set, and what happens to the books afterwards is no concern of theirs. They are not booksellers in any meaningful sense. The compilations exist for reasons internal to the order's understanding of its role, and the secondary market is an accident of how the realms responds to that role. The funding of the keep, more broadly, is one of the questions I have struggled to answer cleanly, and I want to be honest about the limits of my information. The compilations bring in some money. Wealthy patrons and rulers who seek information from the keep are known to leave gifts of considerable value, and those gifts presumably contribute to the order's upkeep. The keep grows its own food in the gardens within the inner ward, and presumably owns or controls some land beyond the walls for the production of grain, and the keeping of animals, although I have not been able to verify the exact arrangements. The Avowed take vows of personal poverty, by all accounts, which means the Order's collective wealth is held in trust for the work rather than distributed to individuals. And the trust appears to have accumulated quietly across the centuries into something substantial. The Keep is not, by any account I have seen, in financial difficulty. Whether the Order is rich in any meaningful sense, I cannot say. What I can say is that the work has continued without obvious interruption for over 1,500 years, and an institution does not maintain that kind of continuity without a stable economic foundation, however the foundation is structured. The political weight of the Keep in the broader realms is, similarly, larger than the Keep's neutrality would suggest. The Avowed take no public positions. They make no political endorsements. They send no envoys to courts. And yet the kings and councils and lords of the Sword Coast consult the Keep regularly, treat its opinions seriously when those opinions are offered, and tread carefully around the Keep's known sensitivities. A monarch who treats the Avowed poorly will find themselves quietly cut out of the loop of information the Keep distributes, will find their gifts at the gate refused on technicalities, will find that the compilations the Order releases happen not to cover the subjects most relevant to their realm. The retaliation is never explicit. The Keep does not issue statements. The retaliation simply happens, and the monarch eventually realizes what has happened, and the monarch eventually adjusts. This soft power is, I think, one of the underappreciated features of the Keep's standing. The Avowed have, across the centuries, taught the rulers of the Sword Coast that Candlekeep is a quiet partner whose cooperation is worth having and whose displeasure is worth avoiding. And the lesson has been absorbed deeply enough that the Keep rarely needs to teach it anymore. I want to say something about the relationship between the Keep and the Harpers, because the Harpers come up repeatedly in the Keep's history, and the relationship between the two institutions is one of the more interesting features of the Keep's external life. The Harpers, as you may know, are a loose network of agents scattered across the realms who work broadly to oppose tyranny, to preserve old lore, and to keep the balance between order and chaos in the lands they cover. Many Harpers are also avowed, or were avowed, or have spent time at the Keep as seekers. Gorion himself was a Harper of standing, as I mentioned earlier in the script. The connection is old, the agendas overlap, and the Keep and the Harpers maintain a quiet working relationship that allows information to flow between them in ways the Avowed's official neutrality would normally prohibit. How does this work exactly? The Keep does not officially share its secrets with any external organization. The Avowed do not officially take sides in the conflicts the Harpers involve themselves in. But individual Avowed who are also Harpers or who have Harper sympathies can quietly facilitate the flow of certain kinds of information when the information is needed and the cause is just. The Order does not formally sanction this. The Order does not formally prohibit it either. The arrangement sits in the gray space between official neutrality and unofficial cooperation, and it has worked for centuries, and the Keep and the Harpers have benefited from it without either institution having to acknowledge the benefit openly. This is, I think, the Keep at its most diplomatically sophisticated. The Avowed know exactly what they are doing. The acknowledgement is the part they decline. There are other organizations in the realms with which the Keep maintains similar quiet relationships. The temples of Ogma, of course, with whom the Order's connections are deepest and oldest. The temples of Denir, Gond, and Milil, whose shrines stand within the hearth itself. The Moonstars, the secretive network that Laeral Silverhand runs, and that, as we have seen, has at times been entangled with the Keep in ways the Keep would prefer to forget. The watchful order of Magus and Protectors in Waterdeep, with whom the Keep has occasional dealings on matters of magical concern. The mages of Shadowdale, including Elminster himself, with whom the Keep has a long and complicated history. None of these relationships is formal, all of them are real. And the Keep maintains them with the practiced diplomatic touch of an institution that has been doing this kind of thing since long before any of the present partners existed. Other institutions in the realms perform the work of widespread access: the printing houses of Waterdeep, the schools of magic, the universities of the southern kingdoms. They produce copies, they distribute, they put books into the hands of as many readers as possible. The Avowed do not regard themselves as superior to those institutions in my reading. They regard themselves as occupying a different position in the ecology of knowledge, the position that those other institutions cannot occupy because their structures are different. Their staff turn over too quickly. Their funding depends on demonstrating relevance, and their buildings are not 50 feet high and warded with old magic. Candlekeep can preserve what other institutions cannot, because the keep has organized itself for preservation across centuries, rather than for relevance within decades. A treatise that loses its relevance will fall out of a university library within a generation. The same treatise, if it has reached Candlekeep, will sit on the shelves of the Great Library for 1,000 years, and one day it will become relevant again. And on that day, the keep will hand it back to the realms. That handing back, repeated across many centuries, is what the Avowed are doing. They are working for readers who have not yet been born. They are preserving texts whose value cannot be assessed in the present moment. They are betting that the future will want what the past produced, and they are arranging their entire lives around the bet. There is a stoicism in this that I find admirable, and also a little strange, because it requires the Avowed to take satisfaction in work whose payoff lies centuries away. Most human institutions need to see returns within the lifetimes of the people who built them. Candlekeep is content to wait. The keep has been waiting for more than 1,500 years, and the patience has not yet given out, and there is no sign that it will. I want to spend a moment, before I move to the closing, on what the keep might look like in the centuries ahead, because the question is one the Avowed themselves must consider whenever they think strategically about their institution. The threats are real. The spell plague proved that the wards can fail. The battle for Candlekeep proved that the screening of initiates can fail. The confrontation at Candlekeep proved that direct assault remains a possibility even in eras when the wider realms is relatively peaceful, and the broader trajectory of the realms is not, by anyone's reading, trending toward greater stability. The gods continue to die and to be reborn. The planes continue to shift. The kingdoms continue to rise and fall. Whatever the keep has survived so far, the next 1,000 years will probably present challenges the keep has not yet faced, and the Order knows this, and the Order's planning, such as it is, takes the knowledge into account. The current leadership, by what I can tell of Genasi and Bookworm, is positioning the keep for a longer time horizon than the previous generation. Genasi's attention to the Order's external relationships, her cultivation of the temples of Denier, and her quiet diplomatic touch with the courts of the Sword Coast suggests a keeper who understands that the keep's survival depends as much on its political standing as on its walls. Bookworm's aggressive acquisitions program, the active rather than passive growth of the library, suggests a first reader who understands that the institution must continue to demonstrate its value if its value is to be defended in centuries, when the powers of the realms might otherwise turn against it. Together they are, by my reading, attempting to position the keep for the difficult period that may be coming. Whether they succeed is a question I cannot answer, because the answer will not be visible in our lifetimes. The answer will be visible to whichever generation of Avowed inherits what Genasi and Bookworm leave behind, and the inheritance is what the keep is, and the inheriting is what the keep does. There is something hopeful in this, and something melancholy, and the two feelings are difficult to separate. The hopeful part is that the keep has survived everything that has come at it so far, and there is no reason to suppose it will fail in the next round when it has not failed in any of the previous rounds. The melancholy part is that the Avowed currently in residence will not see whether their work has succeeded. They will die at their posts or in retirement somewhere quiet, And the next generation will take up what they have left, and the generation after that will take up what is left to them, and the chain will continue as long as the chain continues. And no one in any given link will know whether the chain holds. The keep is built on the willingness to do work whose result one cannot see. The willingness is rare. The keep has found enough people who possess it, generation after generation, to maintain itself for 1,500 years. Whether the willingness will hold for another 1,500 is a question the present Avowed live with as a kind of background anxiety, and that they answer every morning when they rise and go to their labors by simply continuing. There is a saying among the Avowed that I want to leave you with, although I'm only half sure I have the wording right, because the order is reluctant to put its sayings in writing for circulation outside the walls. The saying goes more or less like this: the book is older than the reader. The reader will die. The book remains. Therefore, the work of the reader is to be one of the long chain of hands through which the book moves from the past into the future. That is the work. There is no other work that matters. There is only this work, and the doing of it well. I am not an Avowed. I will never be an Avowed. The life is not for me, and I suspect the life is not for most of you listening either. The loneliness is real. The slowness is real. The renunciation of completion is real, and most of us live for the small completions that mark out our days, the finished projects and the closed loops, in a way the Avowed have agreed to give up. I would not last a year in the novitiate. Neither, probably, would you. But I have spent a long time thinking about what the saying means, and I have come around to the conclusion that the saying is one of the most important the realms has produced. The book is older than the reader. The reader will die. The book remains. Therefore, the work of the reader is to pass it on. When I picture Candlekeep, I picture an Avowed at a desk in the copying rooms, copying a page that someone before them copied and that someone after them will copy. I picture another Avowed walking the cloister with a cat at their heels. I picture the procession of the endless chant rounding the court of air, the chanter's voice clear, the voices answering, the formula falling at the end of each line, so saith the wise Alaundo. I picture Miriam somewhere below in the volcanic rock, vast and translucent, performing duties no living member of the order will ever fully see. I picture the great library rising at the center of the inner ward, candles burning in its windows against the western sky. I picture the seeker at the gate, book in hand, waiting for the judgment that will open the door or send them back down the road. And I picture all of this continuing, hour by hour, year by year, century by century, in a way that has held for 1,500 years, and that I have no reason to suppose will stop. That is the deepest thing the Keep teaches in my reading. Some things are worth doing slowly. Some things are worth doing for longer than a single life can hold. The work has its own independent existence, and the worker draws their dignity from being part of it, and there is no requirement that the worker be the one who finishes what they have joined. No one finishes Candlekeep. The Avowed know this. They are continuing. The continuation is the work, and the work is the place, and the place is the order, and the order is the long answer to the question of what a community of human beings can do if it agrees, generation after generation, that the answer is to keep going. The wind off the sea has not stopped. The fortress has not fallen. The endless chant has not ended. Alaundo's words are being spoken at this hour by someone whose name we will never know, in a procession whose pace we cannot fully picture, in a fortress that has stood through wars and fires and the deaths of gods, and the words are the same words they were 1,500 years ago, and the voice is the same voice, passed forward through the only kind of immortality the Avowed believe in, the immortality of the work being continued. That is Candlekeep. That is the fortress on the cliff. That is the library that doubles as a temple, and the temple that doubles as a library, and the order that has outlasted the orders that thought they were more important. The place asks you what you have brought before it, lets you in, and judges your gift. And If your gift is sufficient, it opens its gates and welcomes you into a silence you will remember for the rest of your life. I have tried in this script to give you some sense of the silence, some sense of the weight of the stones, some sense of what it might feel like to walk among the avowed and hear faintly, through the walls, the recitation that has not stopped since long before any kingdom now standing was founded. I do not know if I have succeeded. The place resists description. The place was built to be experienced rather than summarized. But if anything I have said has made you want to imagine standing at the gate with a book in your hand, wondering whether the book will be enough, then I have done what I came to do. Thank you for listening. The candle is burning low, the endless chant is still going, and somewhere on the Sword Coast, the wind is still coming off the sea.